Hello, welcome back to Raising Arrows Mama. Today I thought I would tackle how we're doing history and what spines we're using this next year as we study 20th and 21st century history. If you are new here, my name is Heather. I am Mama to 8, and we have been doing Charlotte Mason style homeschooling for about 8 years. But a few years ago, I started creating our own curriculum. And by that, I mean I make our own book choices. I choose our focus and studies for the whole year for each child. I have children all the way from infant up to 15 years, and 6 of them will be school age this year, if you count kindergarten. My 6th daughter is kindergarten age. But today I thought I'd tackle kind of what we're doing for history. Now, if you've been following along, I've been doing a series on Charlotte Mason's 3 knowledges: knowledge of God, man, and universe. And we talked about all the things that I think that we incorporate in a Charlotte Mason feast that can point us to God. And that is a whole separate series. And then I am now tackling what she deems the knowledge of man, the things that are men and what people have done on this earth. They're not universal truths. They're just, these are the things that have happened and that have been created and whatnot. And so we're going to go through all those subjects. And that's, I usually post on Friday or Saturday about, but last weekend I talked about history and kind of went through what Charlotte Mason prescribes for a study in history. And I will say that I did follow very much like that last year. This year is very different. Partially because we have so much history to get through, partially because I have so many kids, and partially because of my kids' own unique abilities. What I'm going to share is not what I recommend for anybody or everyone. This is what works for our family because we have a student in Form 1, Form 2 and Form 2, no, one student in Form 1, one student in Form 2, 2 students in Form 3, and a Form 5. So we have like quite the gamut here. And so in order to meet all their different levels, this is what I have devised to work out. Last year, we tried to do a lot more in morning time, and that has worked in years past. But I realized this last year as my kids age, I can't necessarily do that. And so we're putting a little bit more back on them. If you're fans of Amplesite Online, it kind of in that mentality that it's going to be more individualized. However, we are all still studying 20th century and 21st century. And today I thought I'd share my spines with you as best I can and a peek into what we're doing for the rest of our history studies. Again, we are having major house renovations. We're nearing the end of that. It was all to remedy a mold issue, a moisture issue. Hopefully that's been fixed, but until I get moved back in, I do not have all my books, which is a bit alarming because we start school Monday. Hopefully I will find them between now and then, but I am going to share as best I can, and whatever I don't have, I will try to pop a picture up for you to reference. I may or may not add them in the description. It just kind of depends if I have time, but if you have questions, ask it below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. So as I said, I have students that are in kindergarten, first grade, no, she's in second, kindergarten, second grade, 5th grade, 7th, 8th, and 10th. And in order to meet everybody's needs, I've kind of broken them into 3 groups for history. So my high schooler, she does well on her own. She loves doing studies on her own. She specifically asked to do studies on her own a while ago. And so I'm going to start with hers because hers is the easiest, honestly. And so she has spine texts, and we have used 2 texts that we really, really actually loved the last couple of years. I loved. She was kind of hit or miss on. We decided to try another one this year, just for a different kind of layout and different writer. She just needed a change up after spending about 3 years in the same author. And so we're doing, sorry, noises. And so we're doing a slightly different approach. And we have used, you can check on my blog for the past years what we've used. And I also have videos, I think, of last year, but we used Carson's A Basic History of the United States and Heaven Rescue Land by Phil Stringer. Definitely don't do both of those at the same time. That's something we've learned. Heaven Rescue Land is from a Christian perspective and is more storytelling. The Basic History of the United States was a good fit, but it was longer chapters. And my daughter didn't love his writing style. She said it was very dry, very hard for her to follow. Part of that's my own fault because I assigned her both of them, and she really didn't need 2 history spines. So this year she's using 1 history spine, but 3 books. And we're doing the William J. Bennett series. I don't have the third one because we don't need it for a while. But she will be picking up on volume 1. She only has 4 readings from that. And what I did is I went through and decided what areas we're going to study for each term and then broke up her readings according to that. So what we're doing different this particular time, because we're studying so many different things, is I've created modules to get the different time periods because there's so much. And then I went through and found out what I want to study each of those modules. So our first module will be 1900s to 1920s. And so she has the readings, and that will be right here. And it's 6 different readings. So she'll have these 4 readings and 2 from volume 2. And that will be her first 6 weeks. So every tab is a week's worth of readings. That doesn't necessarily mean she has to read it in all one day. So looking at the first one, it's page 475 to 490. That's 15 pages. She could read it all in one sitting, easy, and do a narration over all of that. Or if she would like to, she can break it up into smaller sections and then come and narrate orally in between and then do a written narration at the end is kind of how I do it. So looking at that first section, we start chapter 13, and then there is a couple of breaks, maybe just one, where it talks like Rough Riders and goes there, and then it goes to the next break. So she kind of has 2 sections in there, so she could do it in 2. My way that I work with my kids is I assign it for the week, as long as they get it done by Friday. I don't care how they break it up. As long as they get it done and they do their narrations, I don't care how they break it up, the readings. And so I have their weekly readings tabbed for her for all of those. And so for module 1, which is the first 6 weeks of school, will be 1900s to 1919. And we're really focusing on kind of inventions following World War I. Lusitania we'll touch on, and a little bit about what is going on in the Americas during that time, because you get the Mexican-American War, I believe, is in there. And so that will be in those first 6 weeks. Then for week 7 to 12, we're going to do 1920 to 1939. And so in that, she again has 6 readings, and they're all from here. And I have them marked. And on my little cheat sheet, I not only wrote down, so my high school column is over here on the side. I wrote down the readings, and then I wrote down what it is that's being covered, so that way I kind of know. So like one of the chapters is Peace and Prosperity Through the Crash. So I know that's going to talk about the stock market crash and everything that comes with that. And that gives me a little heads up when I'm looking at my schedule and planning it out. But she is in charge. She will have her own little grid, and it'll say history, and it'll say what book. So America, The Last Best Hope. And she will have that week 1, you need to read these pages in that volume. Week 2, read these pages. And she just adds it into her planner and gets it done. And so that is my high schooler's spine. And then along with her history spine, there are 2 more components to history that I add every year. And that is a historical fiction to go along with the time period. And then I usually am having them do multiple historical fictions or multiple spines, because we need to get American history and we try to get world or European history at least. But because as you get into the 20th and 21st century, everything is just it's so meshed, and they feed off each other. And so our spine does a really good job of treating all of that. You get America and world history, so I don't feel like you need to separate those spines. But there are so many topics that not everything can be talked about in depth. So what I've done is each module, I'm giving my children, my older children at least, 2 options of 2 historical fictions, pick one of them to read about, and 2 nonfiction books from that time period to read about. So let me give you an example. For my high schooler, she has Very, Very Dreadful by Albert Marin. This is about the influenza pandemic of 1918. And it's got some great pictures. I've already read portions of it. I have not read this whole thing. I'm going with simply Charlotte Mason's recommendation that he's a good author and trustworthy. But the sections that I have read in here after our COVID pandemic of almost 100 years later after this, very similar. Like there were same rules about masks and things. It was very eye-opening. Anyways, I'm going off topic here, but she will have this to choose from. And then let me find the right page. I do have this document somewhere. Did I put it over here? No. Well, there's another book. And I want to, I I think it's The War to End All Wars is another book that we have about World War I. So she can choose which one is she going to read for that term. For that module, is she going to read about the pandemic, again, the influenza, Spanish flu, or is she going to choose to read about World War I? And she can pick which one she wants to read. And then the same goes for historical fiction. She will have two choices. I have one called Mama's Bank Account that we are going to be borrowing from the library, her historical fiction this year. And so there is the Mama's Bank Account, which is just some cute tales, kind of what life was like back then, of a mama, and it's very much about what was going on in life then. And her other option is Switchboard Soldiers by Jennifer Chiaverini. Again, we're going to borrow it from the library. And in this book, you follow some of the women who were part of the Hello Girls or part of the switchboard operators during World War I. And it gives so much history about World War I. Like, this was a phenomenal historical fiction book. It's very light. It's not heavy on romance. Like, they have somebody, but that's not the main part of the story. It's not even a whole chapter. It might be a couple paragraphs in a chapter here and there. But Jennifer Chiaverini does such a great job of saying what's going on in the war here, there, and everywhere, why General Pershing's doing certain things. And one of the characters, because it has 3 different points of view, and one of them is Grace Banker, who is a real person. And so I'm hoping that we can also maybe do some internet research and learn how to research a person who is real and tie that in as well. And so that will be her Module 1 history. She's going to read 6 sections from the William Bennett book. She's going to choose a nonfiction book to read from. And then she has a historical fiction, which, again, we'll just break it down into those 6 weeks and read. We may not read all of the historical fiction because some of these, she doesn't necessarily need to read the whole book. I want her to understand it. And I know that goes against the Charlotte Mason principle, but for us, because I'm using it as a supplement to our history spine, I'm okay with her not necessarily reading all of it because it is rather thick. But she also has an interest in things like this, so I can see her reading the whole thing. So she'll have her 6 readings from William Bennett for her spine. Then she will have her nonfiction book and her historical fiction book that I will break down into 6 weeks of reading. And then that will be Module 1. Then Module 2 will be the next 6 weeks because we do 12-week terms. And that will follow 1920 to 1939 with a focus kind of on the Depression, on Hoover, on FDR, and all of those kind of things going on and the things leading up to World War II, but not including America's involvement in World War II. We will focus on that the following module. And so for that, leading up to it, I have her doing the same thing. There's my paper. So she has her readings that will be in volume 2. So she'll have 6 readings from here, 1 for each week. And then I have actually, rather than a nonfiction book, she can either finish what she's reading in Module 1, or she can start reading Stalin by Albert Merrim, which again it's packed up. But that is a biography about Stalin, which will help give her a little background of what's going on leading up and through World War II. And then I have a middle grade nonfiction or historical fiction for her, which is called The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh, which would pair well with this and Stalin because The Lost Year follows a boy living during COVID and his experience and his fears and all the things, but it also ties in the story of his grandmother who grew up in Ukraine when it was under the USSR, and how do you say it? Holodomor, I think. I might be saying that wrong. I'm so sorry. But there was a famine in Ukraine in that time period in the 30s. And so you get that, and it really ties in well with these other concepts that I'm having her study. So even though it's a middle grade, I think it'll tie in well and help her get a great feel for what the culture is, because that's what our historical fictions are for. They are to tie us in to what is going on in the world, what is going on with the culture, and hopefully they allow not just a picture of what it is, but they encourage the child to read more and learn more about that subject. And it always does for my children. If you are reading historical fiction, look for ones that have good author's notes as well, that they will show them what really was going on, especially in this modern setting. And so that's what my high schoolers are going to be doing. Spine, and then a nonfiction and a historical fiction for each module. My younger kids are going to do the same thing. They just have different texts. So my middle schooler and my fifth grader, so I have fifth, seventh, and eighth graders, are going to be using Story of the World. And I'll put a picture somewhere up here of Story of America. And you're like, what? You're using two spines. You just said not to do that. Hear me out. I don't love everything in Story of the World, though we are going to use that primarily, but it skips a few things. And Story of the Nations, I also don't love because it's very light, very, very short chapters, very glimpse around the world. And it doesn't cover nearly as much as this does. And that's just the problem you run into with modern history. And so we're using Story of the Nations from Simply Charlotte Mason for a few chapters. So for example, that first module, 1900, 1920, we're going to use it for their chapter on Lusitania. We're going to use it on their chapter about the Christmas truce. We're going to use it for the Russian Revolution and the Red Baron. And those are all, they were 2 or 3 pages. And I'm sorry, that's packed up, so I can't show you. But then our primary readings will be from Story of the World. And I have it worked out that we're going to be doing history readings from our spines twice a week. And so that's easy to do when those chapters from Story of the Nations are rather short. And again, you can see I've marked them by reading. I don't know what that pink one is for. I probably should take that out because I don't think that's for this time. No, that was one from last year. Said North versus South, 1861. So we're going to start with the Boxer Rebellion, which my kids are already familiar with, having read about Jonathan Goforth and his family last year. And because we've talked about it, I do love the maps in Story of the World. I don't love what this author promotes. However, her spine here is one of the best that I could find. And so there are 2 sections in that first portion reading, and so I would break that up over 2 days. So the first day we would read about Boxer Rebellion, and then the second day that week we will read about the Tsar and the Admiral, talking about what's going on in Russia at that time. And so that will be our spine, and then they also will have a choice of a nonfiction. I have a couple of different options for them, not a lot, just 2. And usually it's like a library book and one, and I do have their one of their options with me. The Yanks Are Coming, again, by Albert Marin. And this does a really good job. It has good photos in it. I've read portions of it. Again, I have not read this all. I will by the end of the year, Lord willing. But it does a really good job. So they will read a nonfiction and then a fiction. And I don't have a fiction option for one with me right now because those are all packed up. But it is actually Jennifer Nielsen books. Lines of Courage and Iceberg. Iceberg talks about Titanic. Lines of Courage are spies, I believe, working here. Jennifer Nielsen does some amazing historical fiction, and you'll see I'll use that for my middle graders a lot this year. And then my 5th grader will have another choice. Hers is actually a short bio on Edith Cavell, which is a nurse during World War I. And she's not going to have an option. Options stress her out. So I've chosen for her. She's going to read about Edith Cavell for her nonfiction, and then she's going to read The Singing Tree by Kate Sardy for her historical fiction for that first module. And again, we're just going to divide it by the 6 weeks of readings, and that's it. And that does, when you think about it, like dividing this up into 6 weeks is quite a feat because you were looking at over 200 pages. But like I said, they can have multiple days to read it. And my kids are used to having 4 to 5, maybe even 6 history readings every week, because we were trying to hit all those different places, you know, church history and world history and American history and this side of American history, you know, we went the North and the South. So this is actually page number wise will even out to be the same for them. And their historical fiction, they're going to fly through because that's what my kids do. And so that is how we're doing history this year. I hope it's not as clear as mud. I hope it's more clear. But basically, they each have a spine. They each have a nonfiction and a historical fiction for each module. And there are 6 modules for a year. And we will extend that to the next year if we are finding that we can't get it done in that time. But I'm pretty confident we will. And you may be asking, what about your 2nd grader? My 2nd grader is going to be using, and I don't have it with me, I wish I did. She's going to continue using a book called The American Story, and I'll pop a picture up here. And this is kind of a picture book. Each chapter has a couple pictures with it, and it covers a specific topic, and they're about 3 to 5 pages long. It's a beefy, heavy book, which is part of why it's packed up because I didn't want to keep it out. But for example, her very first reading is she's going to read pages 191 to 203. and I will probably read those with her because she's only 7. And it's going to cover Prohibition, finding oil in America, Teddy Roosevelt, and the Wright brothers. All of that will be covered in there. And so we're going to read, we're going to do oral narrations, and then she has for herself, she'll have simple historical fiction and nonfiction books. So for example, hers is The Night Flyers, which it's somebody here in America. It's an American Girl book. I don't usually love these, but it's a mystery, which she enjoys. It takes place in America during World War I. It touches on some of the topics of what's going on. We actually have several Christmas books that would fit this, but she's going to be doing that. And then her historical fiction will very much be these cornerstones of freedom books. I have several of them. This one is the one I'm going to have her read for first module, which is 1900 to 1919, and it's going to talk about immigration. And we also have several picture books that she and the kindergarten student, and probably my older kids, because they can't stay away from books that are good. And we're going to get them from libraries. Some of them we own. And I'll be releasing that list much later. But it's a lot of picture books that we will be using along with these to kind of read through what's going on in history during that time period for my younger students. So that's what we're doing. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, my spines are America's The Last Best Hope. Don't know if I necessarily love the title. And then we're going to be using Story of the World along with Story of the Nations. And then we'll be using the American story for my younger kids. And my younger kids are the only ones that I will be reading everything with. My middle schoolers, I will read spine with them twice a week during morning time. And then the rest of the time they will be independently reading. And I just take the book. And if I'm going to read it over 6 weeks, I just divide it over 6 weeks. And that's part of what I'm going to be doing today, is marking these up. So let's just give you an example here. 1, 2, 3. Oh, wait, it has numbers. So this has 7 chapters plus a prelude, which would be an introduction. And so I will divide that up over 6 weeks, which is a little frustrating because it's close, but not quite. So they will probably do the prelude and then part 1, chapter 1 first week, and then everything else will be 1 chapter a week. And then the last week, the 6th week, they will have chapters 6 and 7 that they will read. And then that's just how I'm going to mark it up. And that's how they put it on their thing. And I've shared in how I create my own curriculum, how I give my kids a grid, and then that has all the readings. Here's the week, here's the book, and they find it, they mark it off. Either they can use that sheet or they can put it into their own planner. And that's how it's going to go. I hope to come back once I have my books available to me and share all of the awesome nonfiction and historical fiction that we're going to be using. Because I have a feeling I'll be asked. Let me tell you about my modules. So for our first term, we have 2 modules. Module 1 is 1900 to 1919, and module 2 will be 1920 to 1939, and we will have an exam, and we will have a break between each module. Then term 2, we will have module 3, where we are just doing the 1940s. And I know that there are other terms, other decades that could use a whole 6 weeks to cover, but I just can't do it. And there's so much that is available for the 1940s. That's why it's getting the most focus this time around. Maybe next time we hit modern history, we'll do a different focus. But for term 2, module 3, I will do 1940s. Then term 2, which the second half, the last 6 weeks of it, is going to be module 4. We're going to do 1950 to 1969. And then the last term of the year, what we call term 3, for module 5 will be 1970 to 1989. And then the very last 6 weeks of the school year is 1990 to 2026. And so much happens during that time. And I have so little resources to show them. And so we will probably be focusing more on digital resources for some of our things, because you can look at my lovely little history chart. That's the readings I have from that time period. From 1990, basically my entire life, because I was born in 1985. So we have very little actual readings in our spines, and so I will be supplementing with other books. But that's another day and another story, so make sure you check back then. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, please drop a little globe or world or flag emoji so that I know that you've been watching, and I really do appreciate you stopping by. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will be back hopefully hopefully not too long from now, to share what all of our wonderful history book choices are and how we'll be using them in our homeschool. Thank you again.